Distinguished guests, welcome back, and we're about to go digital. The second plenary will present a high level of political leaders, business leaders, and experts to discuss how the Baltic Sea region can further develop the region's global digital strongholds and bridge internal digital gaps, should there be any. And I know definitely a person who knows if there are digital gaps, and he's called Lukas Ilves, a good friend of mine, who will steer this very interesting debate. Lukas, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And if I can ask our panel to come up and join us, please. So, good afternoon. Noted venture capitalist Mark Andresen said at the beginning of this decade that software is eating everything. Well, now we have the ultimate challenge for software. Can it eat the Baltic Sea region and the multi-annual financial framework? No laughter? I tried. You know, civil servants and jokes, this is why you have politicians like Alex Stubb to make the jokes. So, in Brussels, we are 3 years into the digital single market, an ambitious plan to rewrite Europe's single market legislation for the digital age. Now, in spite of the high attention that digital has gotten, Europe as a whole is still falling behind the rest of the world. On many indicators of innovation, broadband rollout skills, digitization of enterprise, even e-government, Europe falls behind countries like the US, South Korea, and increasingly also China. 8 of the 10 biggest companies by market capitalization are tech companies, but none of them are European. Nevertheless, if we look on a country basis, we see that some of the best performers on those same indicators are here in the Baltic Sea region. A huge portion of the tech unicorns that Europe does produce, that's companies valued at more than €1 billion, like Spotify, Skype, or last week, the ride-sharing app Taxify, that you're using here when you're not using public transportation, come from this region in Europe. So, in Brussels, the Baltic Sea region countries are also among those pushing most for digital single market. And within the region, within Europe, we are an example for integration, which leads us today to 2 questions. What can this advanced region do to stay in the lead? And what can we, as the Baltic Sea region, do together to set an example for Europe? And we have quite the impressive, diverse panel to answer these questions. First, we will hear from Vice President of the European Commission, Andrus Ansip, on the challenges and the opportunities facing a digital Baltic Sea region within the digital single market. Now, Andrus Ansip is no stranger to these topics. As Prime Minister of Estonia from 2005 to 2014, he was a champion of the leading role that the Baltic Sea region can play in Europe's digitization, and he also helped inspire the creation of the Top of Digital Europe think tank. We will then hear from Martin Andersson, professor at the Blekinge Institute of Technology and at Lund University. His research focuses on innovation, trade, and location, and their interplay, with a focus, in particular, of course, on digital questions. And Professor Andersson is co-author of the 2017 State of the Digital Region report. This is a report you all have on your chairs. He will share with us his findings, which will show there's some good news and there's some bad news. I will then introduce the rest of the panel, and I also want to give you all fair warning. Given that the digital revolution affects every area of life, from agriculture to space, I expect you all to have questions and ideas. So we're going to have several rounds of Q&A, and if you don't have any questions, I'm going to start calling on people randomly. So everyone have a question in their head. And you can also ask your questions using Twitter and the hashtag EUSBSR. With that, I would like to ask the Vice President to come to the podium. The floor is yours.
Thank you.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to be here, but I feel like a veteran of digital single market here in Europe myself already. I was not so young Prime Minister anymore, but in the year 2010, 4 Prime Ministers, including me, we wrote a letter to our colleagues, and we proposed to create digital single market in the European Union. proposal was timely, it was a nice proposal, and decision was made to have this digital single market in the European Union by 2015. Well, in the year 2015, we got just digital single market strategy. And I think this Baltic cooperation, for me especially cooperation between Finland and Estonia, was crucial. Thanks to this regional cooperation in some areas, I got an understanding that it's possible, theoretically, it's possible to create this digital single market in the European Union. And secondly, it will be extremely beneficial for all of us. So, now we are somewhere in between. We launched 29 proposals based on digital single market strategy, and then with 15 of those proposals we reached consensus already. But our people, maybe they know just about some of those proposals, about abolishing of roaming surcharges, about portability of digital content, and about abolishing of unjustified geo-blocking, and that's it. But not so many people they really enjoyed those benefits yet. Well, but I promised to deliver a speech, and I have the speech. Ladies and gentlemen, the Baltic Sea is home to one of the most economically dynamic regions in Europe and the world. Something to be proud of, a symbol of international socio-economic success. But the picture is slightly more complicated. I would suggest that multi-state regions like the Baltic Sea face several challenges that are holding it back from achieving its true potential. Deepening regional integration has been a long-standing issue for these 8 countries sharing a coastline of some 8,000 kilometers. Perhaps that is not so unusual. After all, countries often differ in their economic priorities and political concerns. And with 80 million inhabitants, nearly 16% of the EU population, this region is not small. Despite the economic success, it suffers from relatively low internal competitive pressure. Taken on their own, some of its national country markets are just too small. They need each other. That is another reason to intensify Baltic integration for more balanced collective prosperity. And so we arrive at the EU's first and most successful macro-regional strategy, and the reason we have gathered in Tallinn today. A good example of its success can be seen with the Eco-Prodigy project. This aims to make the Baltic Sea region a model for clean shipping. It has helped to increase the eco-efficiency of the region's maritime industry by helping it turn more digital, to enhance ship performance, loading and shipyard processes, for example. As we know, the maritime industry has major economic importance for this region. Using digital technology to improve maritime performance will benefit all its countries. This is also the thinking behind the wider digital single market, which embraces all economic sectors, especially when it comes to high-speed connectivity. I will return to this a little later. The Baltic region countries themselves have a big part to play. Better cooperation on digitalization and research can improve competition in each one and in the region as a whole. In terms of their digital readiness, the Baltic Group of 8 are relatively advanced. The digitalization levels of their economies and societies are mostly above the EU average. In some cases, way above. So, digitally speaking, the region is well placed to embrace technological progress and thrive on it. However, there are substantial differences between countries that are holding back regional progress. Denmark, Finland and Sweden occupy the top 3 spots in the European Commission's 2018 Digital Economy and Society Index. But some countries in this region fall below the EU average, although their problem areas are more specific. As a bloc of countries, the EU is no stranger to the digital divide. National and regional differences are not unique. But we cannot allow them to expand anymore if we are to build a fully functioning digital single market across Europe. They should be minimized and ironed out. Better regional integration with digital policies allows innovative companies based in one country to grow and prosper from a larger and more developed home market. As the digital single market becomes a reality across all EU countries, they will eventually benefit from a more integrated market on a regional and European scale. The same is true for this region too. After all, that is the point of the EU's Baltic Sea strategy, to accelerate the region's integration and boost its economy, to promote entrepreneurship, innovation, trade and digitally driven growth, and to help this rich region make more of itself and prosper. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the digital single market's main aims is to use digital technology to link people and businesses, countries, regions and communities wherever they are in Europe. Everyone, everywhere, should have access to high-speed internet, including 5G. We have set targets for achieving this, which will help to narrow digital divides within and between regions. This region is already a connectivity pioneer in many respects. Take Finland's submarine cable Sea Lion 1, linking Helsinki under the Baltic Sea to Rostock in Germany. Not does it improve real-time connectivity across the region, it helps to position Finland as a data center location. Studies are now underway for an extension to link Finland and Asia via the Arctic. The EU supports high-speed broadband networks in its current funding program. 6 billion euros for broadband rollout and other digital infrastructure, especially in rural areas, from the European Structural and Investment Funds. But of course, we have to look ahead as well. Connectivity will be at the heart of the Commission's proposal for the EU's next long-term budget. For the first time, the EU should have dedicated funding programs for digital in the next financial framework for 2021 to 2027. 9.19 billion euros in the Digital Europe program supporting high-performance computing, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, advanced digital skills, as well as digitalization of industry and public services. There will be also 3 billion euros available in the Connecting Europe facility to support the deployment of very high-capacity digital networks and 5G systems. We need EU governments themselves, as well as industry and business, to match this level of commitment as much as they can. Adequate funding is vital for our digital future, for regions as much as countries. That is how all of Europe can benefit from the opportunities of the digital single market. Let us also not forget that Europe's regions, their towns, cities and villages have a major part to play in building the digital single market. This is where things are rarely put into practice at grassroots level. If they do not work on a smaller regional scale, how can they work in a uniform and coherent way across the vast territory of the European Union? In the digital world, that is vital, and especially in a single market. Europe's regions, including all those in the Baltic Sea region, are where the work to build a digital single market begins in earnest. They are the starting point for Europe's ultimate digital success. Thank you.
Professor Andersson, please.
Okay. Well, my name is Martin Andersson, and I will present a summary of 3 reports that Joachim Wernberg and myself has written for Top of Digital Europe. And all these reports focus us on the case for cross-border cooperation in the Baltic Sea region. And the common denominator, let me see. Sorry. Yes, the common denominator in all these 3 reports is that we try to make a strong case for cross-border bottom-up policy initiatives as a complement to EU-level policy to strengthen a European digital single market. And our arguments for a bottom-up cross-regional policy are, in our view, pretty straightforward. First of all, of course, we all know that the European economy is characterized by heterogeneity. So the individual countries have different languages, different regulations, and also different cultures. And of course, this fragmentation or this heterogeneity is of course a weakness if you compare to a large and integrated market like the US. However, one of the points that we are trying to make in these reports is that if some of these hurdles from this heterogeneity can be overcome, then the inherent variety and the inherent diversity in the European market actually provide very good conditions for innovation and business dynamics. Now, in terms of policy, of course, this heterogeneity creates a challenge because it's quite difficult to come up with a one-size-fits-all policy that suits all the individual countries. So therefore, our conclusion from these reports is that a cross-border macro-regional policy initiatives is a very important complement to an EU-level policy towards a digital single market. And I emphasize that our argument is certainly not that a bottom-up cross-border macro-regional initiatives are a substitute. Not at all. They are a complement. Now, a second argument that we have is that, of course, in the European Union, of course, all the individual countries will always have national policy initiatives. And if you look at those policy initiatives in isolation, they can be seen as quite small and also a little bit constrained. But if a variety of countries have a variety of their own policy initiatives, that means also that these taken together, there is a great scope for learning between these countries. Learn how to tackle certain policy challenges, learn how different countries have addressed certain challenges. And we see cross-border cooperation as one of mechanisms to facilitate policy learning and basically learn from each other and from good examples. Now, we have written 3 reports with 3 different themes that all relates to cross-border bottom-up policy in one way or the other. So what you have in the shares here is actually the last year's report, the 2017 year's reports. But we have written 3 reports altogether, and the first report focused on human capital. And of course, human capital is a critical issue for any country, any industry, or any businesses. But what we found in that report is that, especially if you look at the digital skills and what businesses are asking for, the mismatch that we observe between supply and demand of and demand for digital skills within the individual BSR countries could actually at least partly be addressed by human capital mobility. So if you would have a cross-border macro-regional cooperation between the countries in this region, actually you could actually resolve part of the mismatch between supply and demand of digital skills. The second argument we make in the report about human capital is that human capital mobility is also, in the long run, a vehicle to build trust and to build familiarity that would then provide a better environment for cross-border businesses. Now, in the second report, we shift focus from human capital to focus on cities and city networks. And our argument for focus on cities and city networks are pretty straightforward. So first of all, in most countries, cities are really concentrations of digital skills and digital industries. So they are forerunners in the digital economy. The second point about cities is that many cities are already connected cross-border to other cities throughout the world and throughout Europe. For example, by airports, by ferries, or by regular infrastructure. And taken together, these 2 arguments means that cities actually can be looked upon ideal to be front runners for cross-border cooperation in the digital economy. So that's an argument that we make. And they could actually be, one of the things that we write in this report is also that cities can actually be forerunners for the nations in driving cross-border cooperation in the digital economy. Now, the third report that you have on your shares, here we shift to another perspective and we focus on automation and education. And basically the argument we make in this report is the following one, is that in the recent decades we have seen accelerating technological change. We have seen new technologies, we have seen an explosion of artificial intelligence and so forth. The accelerating pace of the technology of this development means that the uncertainty about the direction of future events increases. Okay, so there is uncertainty about what are the implications for the labor market, there is uncertainty about what this means for education systems, and so forth. And the result of that is that there's an increasing call for policy adaptation, that we need to adapt our policy and to handle this reality that we're now living in a much better way. And we basically make the argument that cross-border cooperation can be very important in order to facilitate and to engage in such policy adaptation. Okay. In each report, we have presented something that we call the gap size graph. And this is what you see here on this slide. And what is then the gap size graph? Well, it's a very simple way of illustrating that the gap between individual BSR countries is not constant. And what do we mean by that? Well, we mean 2 things. The first thing we mean is that if you look at different indicators of digitalization or the digital economy across the individual BSR countries, you would see that the distance between the leading country and the laggard country on the different indicators are different. Okay? So for example, in this graph here, if you look at STEM graduates per 1,000 inhabitants, which you have here in the bottom in that graph, you will see that the distance between the top country and the country that performed worst is not, after all, not that high. But on other indicators, the distance between the leading country and the lagging country is much greater. So that is one way of illustrating that the gap is not constant. The second point about this graph is that if you look at the dots in the figure, you would see that these are actually the individual countries. And there you see that the ranking of the individual countries across indicators is not constant. So on one indicator, for example, Poland is the leading country. On another indicator, it's Finland that is the leading country. And then on a third indicator, it might be Estonia that is the leading country. So the point with this It basically to show that the gap is not constant and that the individual countries in the BSR are actually good at different things, which bodes very well for cross-border cooperation. What I'm now going to do is to go through some of the key policy suggestions that we have had in these reports. And in the report where we talk about human capital, besides making the point about that human capital mobility could be one way in which we can actually address the mismatch between supply and demand for digital skills throughout the BSR region, and also that human capital mobility is a way to build long-term trust and familiarity, we also launched a number of policy ideas. For example, setting up a benchmarking task force that works cross-border to identify best practice, and we also make a strong case for that we really need to start thinking about how to handle cross-border data flows and make that much easier, such that firms and businesses in one country can easily make use of data in other countries as well. So we think that is very important also to create an environment where business can grow and actually take advantage of the whole region. In the second report, about where the focus was on cities and city networks, we draw on the idea that comes from research in economic geography that talks about the combined role of local bus and global pipelines in creating, let's say, competitive cities or competitive regions. So we draw on that concept and launch a number of policy ideas. So one of the things that we try to make a strong case for in the report is that city-to-city incubator exchange programs can be a very nice way in order to connect firms and businesses and markets across borders, right? So this is basically a way to connect startup ecosystems in the different countries in the BSR region, and here the individual cities can play a major role. And we also make the case in the report that this is actually a very good way of trying to facilitate for firms to scale up their businesses. Because there is one thing to start up a business, quite another thing to scale up. Okay? And in the phase of scaling up, if you are in a small country, scale up almost always means in some way or the other internationalizing business, right? What is more, in this report, we also talk about and propose various ways in which cities can, in the region, can engage in cross-border cooperation and develop joint test bed environments within macro regions. So, for example, imagine a firm here in Tallinn working on a new technology. It could be, for example, a new app in a school or something like that. Instead of just having access, let's say, to an ecosystem here in Tallinn, through such cooperation agreements, you could also, while being in the testbed in Tallinn, you can also work in a testbed in a city in Sweden or a city in Poland or a city in Denmark or so on, right? So that's the idea that we launched in this report. In the last report, which all of you have access to here in the room, we talk about education and automation. And here, as I said before, the key message is that accelerating technological change means that we have uncertainty, which create much greater call for policy adaptation. So in this regard, we have a number of policy suggestions. First of all, we emphasize that we need to shift educational focus away from, not away, but we should, in addition to having focus on adoption of technology, we should also focus on adapting to technology, because these are two different things. So adopting technology is basically, you can think of it like a school, make sure that all the kids have an iPad, okay? That technology adoption. Adaption means that the way in which we teach is actually make full use of the technology. We adapt our behaviors, our systems, our ways to teach to the technology. In this report, we also talk about the need for tackling the risk of what we call the dual job polarization, both within and between individual BSR countries. And we also make a strong case for the fact that we need to institutionalize learning, which is in the individual focus, transformation in businesses and firms, and also adaptation in terms of markets and regulations to the new technologies. So, as a summary from all these three reports, basically the bottom line argument we make is that the digital shift calls for both top-down and bottom-up solutions. So top-down here means EU-level strategies to work for the digital single market. but also that we also need bottom-up solutions, that macro-regional cross-border initiatives as a complement to the EU-wide policies. And to make it more tangible, we added this figure here in the end. As you can see, this figure is actually from the US labor market. It describes the evolution of the US labor market since the 1980s up until today. And what can we see in this graph? Well, we see that there's a rising demand for very high-skilled workers, there's a rising demand for very low-skilled workers, and there is a stagnation in the demand for middle-skilled workers. And this is exactly what in the research world, and also I think the policy world, is called job polarization. And this is, of course, the picture for the last decades of a large integrated market like the US. So as a punchline, we can think about, okay, how will this process unfold in a more fragmented market unless we have very strong cross-border cooperation? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So, Vice President Ansip, Professor, thank you for these introductions, which have given us the sort of the intellectual and the policy framework that we now have to deal with for the next few years here. And now we have a fantastic group of people to lead us through what we might do about all of this. So I'm going to introduce our panel. First of all, Karol Okoński is Undersecretary of State at the Polish Ministry of Digital Affairs. But don't worry, he's not just a politician and a policymaker. He also does have a distinguished career in the private sector as an IT manager and as a consultant. Then Åsa Zetterberg is the Swedish government's chief digital officer, appointed at the beginning of this year. She is the point person for the government's digital strategy. And previously, she was a champion for digitization at the Swedish Association of Local Authorities and Regions. So well placed to tie together the regional and national context today. Katarina Ora is Associate General Counsel for Western Europe at Microsoft. And she's previously served in several vice president level roles at Nokia and then at Microsoft. And as you saw, also has a strong connection to today's discussions in the Top of Digital Europe report. And finally, last but certainly not least, Jessica Bleckingberg is responsible for community operations at the Maria 01 startup community in Finland and country manager for The Hub, a platform to help Nordic startups find talent, funding, and knowledge. So let me start with you, Undersecretary Okoński. Professor Anderson's report identifies Poland as falling behind in a few areas, but it also notes that given your size, you could play a major role in the region. Frankly, your domestic market is bigger than ours. So tell us, what is your vision for a digital Baltic Sea region?
So first of all, maybe let me just start by thanking all the organizers for inviting me here for the invitation, and I'm both honored and it's my pleasure to be here, especially as Estonia was and is still mentioned on numerous occasions as actually the country which made the best use of the digitalization. And I'm also pleased of having a company here of President Ansip, who can be also seen as a fearless and successful promoter of digital single market. And I mean, we really appreciated a lot his efforts and his achievements. So I think, you know, what you could see, what to do to strengthen the ties of the region, and then actually find the best way of how the countries that are still, like you said, I mean, frankly, falling behind in some respects, can benefit from the regional cooperation. I think it all in the end comes all to data. The data seen as raw data can be collected both by human, by machines, for different kind of observations, and then this raw data can be the means of boosting the economy. And what we have seen, what we have found out in the study that we commissioned in Poland by our ministry, was that actually, if you look at the so-called data utilization, then actually the countries with the highest mark of data utilization are actually Sweden, Finland, and Denmark. And then the countries that have the highest level of data utilization intensity in some terms are then Poland, Latvia, and Estonia. So I think in all, it brings us and sets up a very good starting position for making something that was actually postulated and was promoted by Estonian presidency of having the free flow of data, the fifth freedom, besides good services, capital, and people. I think, if we, having all the countries having with the same mindset of the quality and importance of data, if those countries can establish at the regional level, here I appreciate what was said in the study, that we need both the top-down and bottom-up initiatives. So if we can find out the way of linking our countries and providing the means of smooth data transfer, interoperability, and the standards between our countries, we can really set an example for the whole European Union, and then we can really even make real what is set up at the European level. And then, of course, this data itself can be then used in a number of possibilities. First of all, given our geographical proximity, of course, the first thing that comes to my mind is just to collect and share the data that we can then use for all the aspects of the environmental protection. So if we can can collect and then combine and analyze and enrich, enhance together the data we have together, then we can, I think, much more effectively combat pollution or safeguard our Baltic coast or do anything and on all other aspects that can be done when you can really have the big pool of data that you can actually work on. Another aspects where we, as Poland, would like also to be considered as one of the, let's say, leaders and at least the one of the driving forces is something that's also highly explored right now is, of course, the artificial intelligence, where apart from the fact that's also already mentioned is one important factor, so the human resources and the skills, so both the data scientists and the programmers, that actually every country is lacking. But another thing that is also very important is actually access to data. Because in the end, the systems that you build, you need to teach to come up with some before just you may make them available for some massive rollout. So here again, if we can work together as a region, then this would be another very important step into making the solutions that are thought out, that are delivered by distant countries in our region, just be much more successful, much more effective, both in the European market and on the global level. And here, I think the cooperation, the exchange of ideas, some kind of observatory that can also have some specific regional touch, I would say, on the topics like artificial intelligence. This is also very important, because in the end, if we come up with some transborder solutions here at the regional level, again, this is a proof that you can do it on a broader scale on the whole European market. And I think another topic worth mentioning is the e-government services themselves. Here, one of the initiatives that has to be mentioned, and I think is a very good move, and that should be looked upon in other areas, is of course the electronic identification. And the EIDAS, the directive, sets a very good example how to approach those topics. Yes, you set a standard. You had the ETSI establish a specific way of communication, a protocol. You have the minimal data set, extended data set of the communication that is exchanged by the parties, and then it gives you a platform for establishing the common European identification means for identification, where you can then propose some electronic services in your country to citizens from another country, or just having the ID from another country. And in the end, by linking those services together, I think, again, looking at our citizens, also just commuting between our countries in the region, I think another good idea would be just to come up and think of the services which might be of some additional value to our citizens, where they can actually do something using their own ID abroad in one of the Baltic Sea countries. And last not least, I think a very important topic would be, for the cooperation, would be the cybersecurity, because in the end, if you go digital, but you cannot set the minimal standard for the security, it can actually turn completely the other way around, that what you would actually like it to have and to be. And I think the integrating our activities here in both the quick and smooth implementation of the NIS directive, but also in the cooperation between our countries in our common view on the Cyber Act that is now also under discussion at the European level. I think looking at ourselves as a region that can speak with the same voice on some given topics like the role of ENISA or the future of the certification in the European Union, I think it would set us also as a valid and very valuable partner for also other big European states that could also look at us as something that to discuss with. And I think in the end, in all of the topics I mentioned, like the cooperation, it's like a classic between the states here, like a classic win-win. I would say each country itself can benefit, and I certainly hope and think Poland can be one of them. But in the end, the region becoming stronger can also be an important partner, and as like said, with other big European countries in the region. But in the end, if the region grows itself, of course, the European Union itself also can benefit, and then can be seen also as a, like I was said by President Ansip, like a real specific rival on the global market with the countries like China or United States. And this is definitely something I hope for and I declare to participate in. Thank you.
Thank you. So I like that you talked about specific projects and specific steps we could take in areas like the environment. But this also tantalizes me with a very political question, which is, we just had Vice President Ansip talk about 12 billion very specific euros that they would like to spend on these specific projects. Now, last time we had the MFF negotiations, 10 billion very specific euros were reduced down to 1 by the member states for digital infrastructure. How do you think we're going to do this time? Will Poland support the 12 billion euros the Commission's asking for?
Well, definitely, we have to take into consideration the potential of each country that is contributing to the common budget. But definitely, we in Poland see the digital topics and the digital agenda as one of the ways of securing our progress. So I think it would be something definitely discussed thoroughly on the political agenda, because we wouldn't want to be left, just. We know there's still some gap that has to be closed with our actions, and if not investing now and not participating actively in what European Union is doing, definitely would still leave us more apart. So no more behind. So so from the political here discussion, I think Poland would still be here a available and trustworthy partner in the next discussions.
Okay, thank you. So, Åsa Zetterberg, one of the cautioning notes that Professor Andrus's report has is that even the countries in the region that are doing well should not rest on their laurels, because we have the whole world that we're competing against. How can the Baltic Sea region help a country like Sweden stay sharp and stay at the top of its game? And perhaps more importantly, what exactly does a government chief digital officer do?
Oh, God. I will give you some of my views here. I've had 100 days, a little bit more than that, on this position. So we're trying to find out what could I do for value, but of course it's more like a coaching role, I would say, in this beginning. It's like coaching a digital transformation on the whole. It's not just a digital question, as we all know. So I'm working for the digital strategy to come through in Sweden, and it's quite a broad challenge, I would say. But I'll give you my view here, and I see all of you and all of you as my teammates. since we're a region and we need to work together. So besides my work as the Swedish government's chief digital officer, I'm a football trainer. I coach 13-year-old boys. It's the best thing you can do. It's so much fun. And I know that when you work together as a team, you can reach much further than you can do one by one. And this is indeed a fact when you're working in a digital world, a world where different actors are part of the same global digital ecosystem and where scaling is the thing. So soon it's time for the World Championship football in Russia, and it's going to be so exciting. And different countries, they will be competing for one another, and I will of course be cheering for Sweden, but when it comes to developing our region and the world to become smarter and more sustainable with digitalization, our region has so much more to win to benefit from working close to another and as one team. So we are one team, we are the Team Digital North, we are the Nordic Baltic region, and the Digital North is a great initiative from the Nordic Council, I would say. So together we are powerful and can make a difference and create value. And only together we can have great power to do this. Together we can strengthen our region as a global digital hub. And this is important for our competitiveness, sustainable growth, welfare and quality of life. And today, many of us are already digital frontrunners, but we indeed need to accelerate to be able to be world leaders even in the future. Big countries, other regions, global players and platform owners are running fast now. And our citizens, they have high expectations of our delivering from both the government services, but also from the businesses. So from the Swedish government's point of view, we are determined to remain in the forefront. We strongly believe in collaboration, and the Baltic Sea region is important for us. This year, Sweden is the president in the Nordic Council, and digitalization is a priority and a comprehensive issue. So I had the opportunity and privilege to presenting a report on just artificial intelligence when the Nordic and Baltic ministers of digitalization and the ministers of enterprise and innovation met a couple of weeks ago. And as you know, AI offers significant potential for the whole region here, both in the business and the public sector. So a widespread use of AI in the economy can double the economic growth potential in the long term. And of course, I will give you one of the examples, because I think we need to be even more concrete for the future to really solve the problems we have. One Swedish municipality is Trelleborg, where the authorities are using an algorithm just to handle decisions for social support. This has led to fewer people on social support, since the authorities could reduce staff to handle applications and increase staff to help people get back to gainful employment. Instead of 10 days of decision making, it is now taking 24 hours. It's one example of how digitalization, AI, and automation will help us to create value. We have plenty of these issues taken care of that are also cross-border ones, so we need to focus on these ones for the future. But we also have challenges, and I'm happy to say that the Nordic and Baltic ministers just signed a joint declaration on AI, and with the ambitions to collaborate on skills development, enhancing access to data, developing ethical and transparent guidelines, and also when it comes to ensuring that AI gets a prominent place in the European discussion in the future and within the digital single market. And Sweden will take a leading role here, but with really tight collaboration with our neighbors, and we like a broad dialogue with plenty of actors on this field. And we really need to help each other. We know the big players are running quite fast here now, so in this AI race, we really need to take the volumes and the scaling parts of being a region in focus from the future here. But I would also like to stress that increased uncertainty, and partly due to acceleration technical development, it demands more and faster adaptability. It applies to individuals, businesses, public sector, and raises important questions about long-term forecast, policy development, lifelong learning, culture, and leadership. And I would say that data is maybe one of our time's biggest assets. We really don't know yet the big potential of it all, but people, of course, is another one. And our citizens' expectations, their skills, commitments, and trusts are key for success. So we can't just focus on the technology itself, of course, but also on the culture and the leadership and the transformation of coaching, really a transformation of the society to get all the values on place. And we need to also attract skilled people to our region. We need to have the best investors, the best business, the startup sector to come to our region to find how nice we're having in here and create value together with us. And my experience from working with collaborations among municipalities tells me that we sometimes need to be more specific to combine the strategies also with concrete problems or concrete challenges and work on these ones to sit together and try to find out how we could actually deliver in new ways. And I'm confident that we have some of the same challenges and we have more potential of working cross-border here. And I'm also confident that by acting as one team, the Team Digital North, we will all be winners. We will also, and most importantly, give a lot of benefits to our citizens and our businesses here. And that's what I would like to start with.
Thank you. So we talk the talk of regional cooperation, cities learning from each other. But the reality is sometimes more difficult. And in my experience as a civil servant trying to do e-government cooperation in the region, it was all very nice, but when you got to the implementation, everyone started thinking, yeah, but it's not really invented here. And do I really want to take my neighbor's solution? So you've been on the, on the regional level, and now you're seeing the national level. What can we do to overcome that not invented here syndrome that we need to if we want e-government cooperation or any cooperation to really work in digital?
What I was doing when I was working with the municipalities is like, we can't really afford working the way we're doing. Not for the citizens' expectations, not on an economic level, and not for the future of innovation. We can't afford doing it ourselves. And I suppose when we're talking about our countries collaborate as well, and when we need to be competitive in a world, we need to collaborate. We don't afford to do anything else, and we have so many benefits of doing it. But we need to focus on the right spots where we should collaborate, when we have lots of benefits of doing it. We can't collaborate on everything. It's taking quite a lot of resources as well. So of course we have the EU level that is important, making the conditions for everybody. But we also need the concrete complementary projects and initiatives, I would say.
Okay. So, Katarina, Microsoft is no stranger to the Baltic Sea region, and you have made quite some major acquisitions and purchases through the years. Nokia and Skype come to mind. There are others. But you're also flush with cash now. Congratulations, you just surpassed Google in valuation, or Alphabet. What can we do as a region to get you to reinvest some of that money back here, whether that means companies, development centers, and what makes a region like the Baltic Sea region attractive for a big player like Microsoft?
Thanks for asking, Lucas. And first of all, let me thank you for having me. It's great to be in this beautiful city, which is absolutely one of my favorite cities in the world. And the theme couldn't be more topical. So, how to make this region sort of continue blooming and sort of growing is very close to also my sort of employer's heart. And actually, before actually talking how much we will invest in the future, let's take one step back and sort of you might wonder why a US headquartered company is represented in a forum like this today. But actually, sort of Microsoft established its presence in this region actually by opening offices in Sweden already more than 30 years ago, when we only had like 1,000 employees globally. Sort of as you were mentioning, we have also invested a lot of money. Actually, quite surprisingly, I would say this is the region where we have invested the most money after North America. So over $20 billion over the years, which is an incredible sum of money. And we heard about the sort of business acquisitions that we've had. And also I understand that earlier today there was a mention about Innovation Center established in Riga as well in collaboration with Microsoft. And obviously to sort of highlight and sort of make sure that this region continues to grow and prosper. We also, some 4 years ago, we created, together with Baltic Development Forum, the think tank that we heard the report from today, which is Top of Digital Europe. So pretty sort of massive and long-lasting investment and interest in the area. And obviously we all know, and I'm proud to have origins in this region as well. So we all know that the strongholds in the region are the sort of education, the people, the sort of technology, understanding, sort of stable, predictable political climate that we have, education that hopefully will continue and is a sort of almost second to none anywhere in the world. So I think I sort of to make sure that companies like Microsoft and others will continue investing in this region is exactly what we are here to talk about today, which is how to sort of promote cross-border collaboration, make sure that the growth continues in a very sort of progressive way. How to attract people, how to train people, how to make sure that the economical sort of climate stays the same or improves. So those kinds of things are the key to any investment. So and obviously, there needs to be always some specific reason for companies to invest, and I'm sure that there could be some continuing also in this region. So let's keep it this way. So I'm happy to be here today.
But let me ask you a politically somewhat more loaded question. And we heard that cities have to work more closely together. Does that mean a hollowing out of all but a few cities as everyone moves to Stockholm and Helsinki and maybe Tallinn, but leave Lapland and Skåne and the hinterlands of where I'm from in the south of Estonia empty? I mean, what does AI actually mean for the regional politics?
Well, and I'm sort of luckily day to day I'm sort of not very political sort of focused, but obviously I think technology and digitalization and AI and all of the technological development actually is one way to keep people included and be part of the society and be actually sort of making sure that they have access to services, etc. So it's rather than actually always thinking that sort of technological development means that everybody needs to live in a city. It probably actually means the contrary, that we can actually make these other places also alive and active and participating. And that's obviously something that, with the, when we talk about AI, it's nothing that is sort of coming some years in the future. It's already here. It's in many services that everybody of us actually uses, and it's only going to grow in the sort of numbers and amount and ways that we use it, and sometimes we don't even know that it's actually in the background. And we just need to make sure that the sort of regulation sort of atmosphere stays in such a manner that AI is means to a better world, to a better region, and is inclusive, is fair. Privacy needs to be respected. It needs to be sort of actually sort of answering and accountable in the same way as any technologies. And it needs to also account for the development. So what happens when AI collects information? What happens when it's sort of getting more and more sort of self-sufficient in a way that we understand how it works, that there's transparency. It needs to be, people need to understand how it works and where it's actually used. So I don't know whether that's answered your question immediately, but it's actually, in my view, it's a way to include people, not to exclude people.
So Jessica Blackmurray, I see you nodding, but you know, startuppers don't have the time on their hands that think tankers, academics, politicians, big corporations do, because you're making something. So what room is there in the mind share of the startups you work with to think about the Baltic Sea region, if any?
Well, first of all, also on my behalf, I want to thank you for having me here today and joining this panel representing the startup community. If some of you don't know Maria 01, we are a community house for startups in Helsinki. So we in-house 80 startups and 15 VCs and startup organizations. And previous to that, I was working with Slush, which is one of the leading startup and tech events, taking also place in Helsinki once a year, where I had the great opportunity to work with the entire Nordic startup ecosystem and the community for the last 3 years. So I would really say that I've been a community builder in the Nordics for the last years, and also I'm a part-time student in Helsinki, so representing that as well. But I would really say if we look back into the entrepreneurial landscape and looking just 10 years back, what it has been and what it is today, there's been some great changes happening here. So for instance, in 2008, there was a really need in the Nordics to actually change the attitude towards entrepreneurship. If you went into a classroom and asked students if they could consider themselves becoming entrepreneurs, there were not really that many hands that went up in the air compared to what it is today, which is a great achievement. Another one was to also place Northern Europe, and especially the Nordics, as one of the leading startup and tech hubs in the world. So we could stand next to leading hubs such as Silicon Valley and Shanghai, because together we're representing as big of an amount of populations, the Nordics and Shanghai, for instance. And the last one was to make sure that there is more international venture capital coming into the region. And in 2008, and especially in Finland, we usually say that the fall of Nokia was the rise of the startup ecosystem back home. So a lot of the talent from Nokia went out to start their own companies, and it's been booming ever since. Well, not only Finland, as we know, but the whole Nordic and Baltic region. And it's really great to see that it's been flowering for the last 10 years. So if we think of the Nordics during the last what would that be? Since 2005, even if we're representing 3% of the entire population in Europe, 50% of the unicorn tech exits have come from the Nordics, really explaining that there's something good happening in the region and something that really indicates that the Northern Europe and Nordics and Baltics is a place where companies and entrepreneurs actually can build a global company, business, startup, and whatnot. And I think it also, if we look at the great startup and tech news that have happened this year, Spotify being listed, last week news about Taxify raising a new round, Klarna and Isadol really being frontrunners in fintech in Sweden, it's really our job to make sure that we're keeping up with the momentum and making sure that the Nordics and the Baltics also will be the most startup-friendly regions in the world. So as we look into digitalization and also looking into new legislations happening at the region, it's really important to make sure that the Baltic Sea region will remain its position as being one of the best competitive regions in the world. And looking at startups have really been the forerunners of creating new jobs in the regions and also creating job destruction in the whole region. And when I read the Baltic region report, actually this early morning, it also indicated there that the labor and productivity growth has been the dominant source of the GDP growth here in the region since early 2010. So it's very important also, therefore, that we're supporting the startups who are building the great big companies of like Microsoft of tomorrow. And when we look at creating jobs, we also have to look at the talent, which is one of the things that are close to my heart, especially because I work with that today. It's about talent attraction and making the Nordic and Baltic region to be a very attractive place for anybody to come and even start their own companies, whether that's inside the EU boundaries or outside EU boundaries. And we all know that Estonia has been a great forerunner in this with the e-residency programs and startup visas. And I'm very happy to see that we also launched a startup visa program in Helsinki earlier this year, which indicates that talents outside EU can also come now to Helsinki to start up their businesses, which is amazing. So we have a great region that is attractive to talents to come, move to and start their own companies, or move to the region to join a company, for instance. And I think it's in the integration part that we also have to actually step up a bit when we're looking into, making sure that the talents are, being integrated in the society, that there are housing in the cities where this talent is coming to. I think a great example of that is a couple of years ago when Spotify was recruiting international talent from the US, and the talent couldn't stay in Sweden because they didn't get any housing. So also making sure that we have a landscape and environment that is friendly for this talent to come into. Also for the members who are joining the startups, that there are better conditions on stock options. So if they want to, acquire some equity in the companies, it's not going to be hugely expensive just because they're foreigners. And also to make sure that there are, of course, common laws that will benefit the economies for each countries. And it's not only about integrating the talent, but integrating the families. So also when talent moves, they might have not parents, but wives, husbands, children's. So making sure that even children, for instance, have a possibility to go school, university, whatnot in these countries. And what I'm glad to see also today, as we also have a chief digital officer here, that there's people in governments, not in all of the Nordic governments at least, but who are presenting the digital front runners and the startups. And also I'm very happy to see that Denmark has a tech ambassador who's representing Danish companies and startups in Silicon Valley and are lobbying the Danish companies and businesses to the companies there. So it's great to see that things are also happening on this side of the table, since startups always have been the ones going on their own very fast and everybody else have been a bit behind. But I think there's some great improvements happening here.
I want to pick on you on the question that kind of is floating in the air, but we might as well tackle it head on. You talked a lot about Nordic this and Nordic that, and you said Nordic Baltic a few times, but we've got a meeting here of the Baltic Sea region, which is also bits of Germany. I would say, okay, everyone likes the mountains of Bavaria, but actually the northern part of Germany is real pretty and deserves more of our tourism than it gets. Yeah. And Poland, which, again, much bigger market than any of us. So how can we sort of not just think about the Nordic, but think about the whole region?
I would say, and especially with my experience when I, for instance, started working at Slush, which was in 2015, the reason why we actually, or why they recruited a person to take care of the Nordic operations was because the hubs weren't really at all connected. So, and when I'm talking about the hubs, I'm talking about co-working spaces, accelerators, tech events, and people who are really doing their best to serve the entrepreneurs on a local level. So therefore, we actually did a tour back then to just tour around the Nordic hubs. And again, it was just the Nordics this time. But it was a great way for us to actually come together and do events on a global level as well. So we did some Nordic delegations, for instance, to New York, Asia, and Singapore, Tokyo, and Shanghai. And that was a great kickoff in 2015 when we actually launched a great collaboration between the leading Nordic tech hubs. And that was a great start. And that's about building communities. It takes time, and you need to get to know people. And today I'm really happy to see that the whole Nordics are very united. The Nordic, like whether we're talking about the community builders, the investors, or the startups, we don't see the country boundaries, so we're all united. And it's really great to see that there are also great collaboration between hubs where we can circulate like startups and help each other on the ground. So I think there's been, of course, a way to build first a strong Nordic community, and it's never about, of course, excluding any other. And last year we were here at Latitude to actually also talk a lot with the Baltic tech stakeholders and the hubs here, also initiating great collaborations for future, which is really great to see. So I would say also, because during the last 10 years, it's been taking time to kind of like create the ecosystem and the local communities. And from there, it's just growing, becoming bigger. So in general, what I also seen, especially last year, that the European hubs are also very well connected with each other, and people are really happy to share their own networks and doing introductions on a local level as well. But of course, if we look at the bigger picture, I think and Nordics are frontrunners in many things, but there's so many things that we also can learn from the countries on the other side of the Baltic Sea, so to say.
All right. Vice President Ansip, when you were Prime Minister, you kicked off some quite intensive collaboration across the bay, as it were, with Finland in e-government, and we're starting to see some fruits of that now with social security data and prescriptions moving. But this, of course, was bilateral cooperation. What could we do to make that type of very intense bilateral cooperation that's built on the types of person-to-person links that Jessica was just talking about work on a regional level, and sometimes even a European level?
Well, we had real challenges. Some years ago, Estonians working in Finland, they had to bring some document from Estonian population register, printed out, of course, on paper. And for this, people, they had to take their ferry tickets or airplane tickets to travel to Estonia, stay on long queues, and then those civil servants, they printed out this material from their digital systems and then put the signature and, of course, stamp, which was important. I don't know about this, but anyway. Then back to ferries, back to airplane, and to Finnish civil servants. And of course, they were much better than Estonian ones, and without making any mistakes, they put this information from paper documents back into their computers. So, on 21st century, not anymore. In the end of 2013, first intergovernmental agreement was signed digitally by Prime Minister of Finland and Prime Minister of Estonia. Me, of course. Well, now business register, for example, the Finnish one and Estonian one, they're able to communicate. But in top 10, according to Digital Economy and Society Index, when talking about digital public services, there are even 6 Baltic Sea countries. Finland, Sweden, Denmark, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. But those countries, they are developing their systems alone, not cooperating so much with their neighbors. And as you mentioned, not invented in our country, we will not use this one. It's reality, sorry to say. Good practice is really, when we are talking about Finland and Estonia, they are trying to create this unified data exchange platform, X-Road, together, mutual recognition of e-prescriptions. But generally speaking, also in our region, we have to say that we have a lot of really good digital public services, the same e-prescription, for example. So you can use in your own country, but when traveling to a neighboring country, you think that, oh, if it's possible to use this e-prescription even here in poor Estonia, then why not in Sweden or in Finland? And then they say, no, sorry, this is your ID card, but this is not about e-prescription. So we created with digitalization some new challenges. Estonians traveling to Spain, for example, they would like to rent a car. Once again, you don't have to carry your driver's license with you here in Estonia. So ID card is enough. But they say, sorry, this is your ID card. This is not a license. So about Spain, I can understand. But in meaning of digital public services, they are also doing really well. But why it has to be so complicated to try to create systems covering the whole Baltic Sea region here? So there are some really good initiatives already, mainly thinking once again about Finland. But I think we have to push on much more on our regional cooperation, and then it will be much easier to take over this good practice also on the level of the European Union. So full support to this.
So Professor Andersson, I'm going to flip your role a little bit here. Okay. You've given us a wonderful presentation on what needs to be done. You've now heard from 2 policymakers and 2 private sector representatives on what they view of this. What is your question to our panelists, if you had to pose one? And feel free to be mean to them and sort of press where it hurts. If you want some time to think about it, we can get some more questions from the audience. Okay. And then we'll see what reactions we have. So the same request goes to all of you. And I've been checking Twitter. No one has asked questions on Twitter. You're all being polite and retweeting. Ask where it hurts. I see a hand here and a hand there. Let's get some questions and let's squeeze our panelists a little bit, please. And I think we have microphones that are coming too.
Not squeezing us. Okay, thank you. Does it work? Yes. Thank you. I'm Ewa Rumińska-Zimny, Warsaw School of Economics, Poland. And very interesting panel. I welcome so much women on the panel, as I'm here because of the project, which is on innovation, startups, and gender equality. And when I listen to the report, you use basically the general data, which are not split into men and women. If we talk about access to internet or to soft skills, computing skills, it's a difference. We have a gap. And I think it's important in terms of policy implications. So my question to the panelists would be, do you think a gender perspective matters in building a digital economy? And if so, could you just maybe give some hints how it could be introduced? Thank you.
Good question. Please.
This is okay. So Mait is European Students Forum. So you wanted some mean questions and impolite questions, so I'll ask one. It kind of goes to Martin, sorry, but it could also go to any of the other people who made these wonderful reports and to the organizers, that we are right now in a panel discussing digitalization in a conference very heavily concentrating also on sustainability, the environment. And each one of us has received quite a few nice booklets on glossy, very unsustainable paper. I estimate we have 3 so far, I think 500 people, so more than 1,000. Could maybe these kind of booklets be distributed in a digital way, like using such very innovative and new techniques like email and websites instead, and save big quantities of paper? And this is, okay, your one booklet isn't going to have a huge impact on the Baltic Sea, but if you take together all the conferences, there's thousands of them every year on the banks of the Baltic Sea. And we're talking about millions and millions of booklets, and then that's already something that could, for example, feed an entire cellulose factory, which, for example, Andrus Ansip came out in the media just a few days ago against one cellulose factory that was that is kind of planned to be constructed on the banks of a river, which drains into a lake, which drains into the Baltic Sea. So can we maybe start this both sustainability and digitalization also from ourselves? Thank you.
Good question. Anyone else from the audience? Please.
Hello, everybody. I represent a very early entity, crypto economy organization. So actually what I was missing here a little bit of that dimension, of course, you know, the facts speak on themselves. I don't have the full statistics, but if I look at certain countries, for instance, over more than 100 startups have been registered in Estonia with these ICOs. Around 40 teams, development teams and startups were established within Lithuania, which raised half of the billion euros since over 9 months, which was not the case over the 10 years. So my question to the panel is what we can do to foster our region, Nordic Baltic region, with this new digital economy, blockchain economy. Thank you.
Any other questions? We've got one more here in the front, and then we'll head to our panel, starting with Martin and his question.
My name is Karol Petersen, coming from Denmark. I had the pleasure in Baltic Development Forum some years ago to head a policy group on implementing EU's digital agenda in the Baltic Sea region, very much inspired by then Prime Minister Ansip. Now, this cooperation between countries and implementing across borders, could that be a lack of trust? That you don't trust other countries actually to protect the data that you will be exchanging? And I'd like to also, to Mr. Okoński, saying you took up the question of cybersecurity. I think this has to be absolutely on the top of the agenda, because that could be a catastrophe for our whole society and development of our European agenda if we do not manage to deal with that. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Martin, what's your question?
Well, well, thank you for the question. Well, actually, the question I would have is both for the policy and for the startup community is, or the business community. So the question I have is as follows. So, as you were rightly commenting on, I think all of you, is that of course the issue of startups and in-job creation and moving the society forward is really important. Do you agree, so the question is like this, would you agree that the phase from startups to scale up, so you develop your business model, you develop your firm, and you know, right now, at least I would say in Sweden, the policy focus is still on startups, but it tends to focus a little bit more on scale up. So how do we get the startups that we have to scale up their businesses? So my question is, would you agree that the issue of cooperation and the issue of, you know, having an institutional infrastructure that can facilitate connections to other markets in the BSR between the countries could facilitate a scale-up process? For example, by adapting policy models, business models to new institutional context and so forth. That's one of the arguments that we have had. I just want to try that argument on you and see if you agree on that.
All right, and we have 5 minutes left, so that's going to mean lightning answers from all of our panelists, and if you have any closing thoughts, please build them in. So, Mr. Okoński, the floor is yours.
Yeah, so a lot of topics arised during the last few minutes. So first of all, let me just refer to what you actually mentioned a few minutes ago, that I also noted that there's been the Baltic Sea region itself, it's as a name, it's probably least mentioned throughout the panel. It's more like the Nordics, Baltic Sea than the... But still, I think it's quite natural that there are some cooperation that was already established some years ago. It's the one that, you know, was the one that's most natural, and the one that you built upon. Although I think it is true that we have to sort of like balance between those regional cooperations between, let's say, the cooperation and some competition, because in the end, you have like one European Union, but in the end you have like the Nordics, Baltic states, we have our own Visegrad group, there's a Free Seas initiative and so on. So I think we have to find some best way how to, let's say, take the best out of each, not really competing against each other or trying to figure out that one of the regions would be, let's say, one of the sub-regions would be the ones that will still concentrate on, but that in every cooperation there's some specific add-on value that can be found. And of course, Poland is of course willing to cooperate with Baltic states and Nordics as well. Now, again, and one other thing was not mentioned here, but I think has to be mentioned. I mean, if you look at the Baltic Sea, there's still one country that is missing there in today's forum, and it is Russia. And I mean, maybe there's a way, especially if you go to some digital topics, where you could still find some terms of discussing and cooperation also with them. You know? Now, as for the blockchain topics, in Poland, what we see as a kind of a problem, and we're trying to figure out the best way out of this, is, let's say, try to still separate the cryptocurrency, let's say, business and the regulation and policy connected to this, with, let's say, with the blockchain or distributed ledger technology as a separate topic. So let's say, and especially from the perspective of the Minister of Digital Affairs, we look for ways of employing and using the blockchain technology, or DLT, and there are some examples right now where we will be seeing some first uses in the public sector, although still remain quite cautious as for the cryptocurrency itself. And I think here the cooperation in let's say, bringing some trans-border infrastructure for blockchain initiatives is definitely one that should be mentioned, and thank you for this question here.
Thank you. Oh,
yeah.
Sorry, Åsa?
I pick one. I picked the one from about the gender. It's in Sweden. It's 1 out of 4 or 1 out of 5 that is a woman in when it comes to the IT sector. Of course, it's quite problematic. We're shaping a new future. The digital world depends on how we do it, what we focus on, and what we deliver. So we need to have a diversity, not only when it comes to gender, it's age, it's ethnicity and everything. So we're discussing it quite a lot in Sweden right now. How could we both motivate young girls, and how could you also on lifelong learning complement your operating skills wherever you are in your work, to complement that with other kind of skills that are more of digital skills. So it's a good question, and it's one of my focus for the future. It's really important.
Katarina?
So in a spirit of actually having a lightning answer, so I guess I would emphasize the need to embrace the technology and sort of prepare the nations for the adaptation and adaptation of technology at the same time. So, you know, we talked about this cross-border public services availability, trust, blockchain. Well, blockchain technology could help the trust question, etc. There's a lot of that can be, you know, found in the technology, and you know, leading or sort of taking your good example. I also want to say that, you know, public and private companies are taking a serious sort of actions when it comes to girls, and how we ensure that the half of the population is having access to and is used as a sort of a source for innovation and growth, i.e. girls. So we have a massive number of programs in place to make sure that girls get interested in science and technology, engineering and mathematics.
I think one of the important things there is also that we need more role models, absolutely, to inspire young girls early in primary school. To add on the automation, it's very important to remember that it doesn't, you know, destroy opportunities in job creation. It actually creates more jobs for the society, which is great to see. And also to touch on the subject regarding the scale-ups. If we look at the investment environment from last year compared to 2016, there was more investments happening to the Nordic region. The rounds were actually also bigger that were happening to the startup, which is really indicating that the whole region is maturing and that there's also access to later stage capital for the startups, which has been one of the problems the previous year. So it's great to see that that has improved.
So what Vice President Ansip just whispered to me is that the whole digital single market is about scale-ups. My quick answer on the environmental bit is at least we have our 2 government representatives here using iPads, so a step in the right direction. With that, I hope that you join me in thanking the panelists. And the one charge I give all of you, and I see many are leaving now already for the first of the topical discussions that we have today and tomorrow, is there is not a single panel today, a single topical discussion today or tomorrow that does not have a digital component. So I hope that these thoughts are reflected throughout these 2 days, because if there's any region in the world that can do mainstreaming of digital and get out of this silo of digital versus everything else, it's us. So with that, thank you to the panel. Thank you for joining in the discussion.